Mr. Secretary, I'd like to move to our own hemisphere here. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and its support for engaging Cuba, and during its launch of the US-Cuba Business Council stated that, and I'm quoting here, "We're facing a historic opportunity to support a vital and growing Cuban private sector, one that is defined by entrepreneurs whose expanding efforts show that the spirit of free enterprise is already taking hold in the country." In fact, multiple states have already inked trade agreements with Cuba, increasing business opportunities for rural and urban areas alike, and the Cuban people themselves, including those who host tourists from the United States, either in cuenta propistas or Airbnbs, have gained entrepreneurial experience and have begun the work to pull themselves out of poverty. Do you agree we should continue these efforts, or do you believe that we should return to the failed policies of the Cold War?
Senator, what you described is the sunny side of the relationship, and it's all positive, and it is great, and it is good. There is the dark side, though, and that is that Cuba has failed to improve its own human rights record. Political opponents continue to be imprisoned. Dissidents continue to be jailed. Women and white continue to be harassed. And so what we have to achieve in approaching Cuba is, if we're going to sustain the sunny side of this relationship, Cuba must, absolutely must, begin to address its human rights challenges. Now, within that sunny side of the relationship, there are troubling elements to us that bring the relationship into conflict with existing statute obligations. And that is that as we're developing these business relationships and as we're enjoying the benefits on the economic and development side, are we inadvertently or directly providing financial support to the regime? Our view is we are. And the question is, how do we want to deal with that? How do we bring that back into compliance with longstanding statutory obligations? So we are examining that. We would love to keep the sunny side. We'd love to keep it in compliance with existing statute that doesn't lead to financial support for this, what we can only describe continues to be a very oppressive regime.
Mr. Secretary, should the United States make it easier or harder for U.S. companies to engage in Cuba to improve access to the Internet? Do you believe, as many on this committee do, that access to the Internet is an important part of creating a modern and just society, including supporting nascent entrepreneurs? And finally, will you build on efforts from the previous administration to help U.S. companies do business in Cuba?
We do support greater access to the Internet, not just for the commercial economic reasons, but we also think it's an important way people have access to voices of freedom and democracy and greater visibility. So we are supportive of that. We are supportive of continued economic development as long as it is done in full compliance with our existing statutes to not provide financial support to the regime. That's the focus of our current policy review.
Yeah, and this isn't a question, it's just a final comment. If that's the sole test on financial support from the regime, and if they're getting money from small businesses and everything, then it just seems to me we're headed down a path of once again closing down the abilities of these private businesses and Airbnbs and cuenta propistas and a lot of others to be out there and people be making a living and developing the private sector. I mean, as long as I've been working on this issue and the opening up, I mean, we've seen 500,000 people that are working there in the private sector. But if the test is going to be, do they give a single dime to the government, then we get ourselves, I think, in a situation where we go back to the old Cold War policy, which I think has been a real failure. But
well, Senator, I know you're not suggesting that we encourage private companies to violate the law, but it does require perhaps a more thorough discussion among the Congress and the executive over, is that law still useful? But the law is there. We cannot ignore that law, and we cannot encourage people to violate that law.
Thank you, Mr.